Okay, thank you very much. There we go.
Lovely. Okay. Hello, everybody. It's me, Rabab. I am a member of the English Division at Innopolis University, and I am very pleased to be joining you guys today because we all need to learn together from Professor Joseph Brown about how to publish a paper. I hope from A to Z. So we will leave the floor to you, Professor Brown, just to say why you've chosen this time to discuss this topic at this moment, and then probably we will just get to everybody's questions. Please,
Okay,
Professor Brown.
great. So I'm Professor Brown. I'm a professor at Annapolis University. I basically have just over a decade of being inside of the publishing domain. So working within the field of computer science, a little bit of literary criticism. And so through that, I've done a lot of publications. So this is both journals, peer-reviewed conference papers, just kind of like side stuff, poetry, books, book chapters. And so I know that a lot of our students are either right now in the process of developing their theses, which are moving to some sort of publication, or some of you are in the third year and right now trying to kind of decide on what do you want to do and are interested in what's going to happen next year, especially. So the idea of this meeting, and now I believe this is about the second or third year that we've done it, is just to kind of have those questions come to us about what is the process to move towards an actual publication. So mostly I'm here to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Brown. Professor, can I ask the first question that would come to my mind? And probably I know from like while teaching our students, probably the first question that we would think about, why would I publish a paper? What would motivate me to publish a paper? So before we start with the process, so what do you think? How can you help us answer this question?
So I think it goes back to what is the purpose of this? And part of it is it's communication of ideas. It's communication as well as in order to kind of set kind of a historical record of what we've been doing. So I'm interested in communicating with other academics what my group is up to, what we're working on, what interests we have, and also things to prevent them from reinventing the wheel. We as academics, we're in this glorious position in which we develop a whole bunch of stuff, and yet we're not doing it for the profit motive, so we can tell everyone why we're doing it and prevent other people from going down paths that they shouldn't travel or allow them to build upon the work that we're doing. I believe one of the greatest quotes on this was, "If I am able to see farther, it is only because I stand on the shoulders of giants." And what this was referring to was there's all this back history of knowledge, and through that back history of knowledge, it allows for new knowledge to be generated and created on top of it rather than having to try to constantly rebuild this.
Thank you so much, Professor. One of the questions our students wanted to know about is like, my paper is ready now, and I need to know what I should do next. And can we add something also to this question?
Yeah.
I am writing the paper. I am now in the process of writing the paper. Is there something I need to keep in mind in order to guarantee that my paper would be published? So can we just tackle these two issues about before and after getting the paper ready, please?
So if we're looking at the beforehand, what would I want to ensure going into when I make the submission of a paper? What I'm really interested in that process is getting it to the point where if I was reviewing the paper, if I'm looking at the paper, would I want to accept it? So there's usually some form of peer review or an editor or someone that looks at this document before it goes to publication. Because otherwise it would just, I can make a blog and I can just write. Right. But since we're in an academic field, what we do is we have others look at our work and evaluate it and provide critical feedback to us. So what I'm trying to do when I'm writing is I also need to think about where are the weaknesses that a reviewer is going to see and how do I address those before I get to the review process. So it needs to be in a state which we would consider publishable. And so that's things like the spelling and grammar should be checked. And this is even beyond just, you know, I ran it through spell check in Word or I used Grammarly on it. This is having someone read through it and check it and make sure that there's nothing there. That, you know, there's a good argument that flows throughout the paper, it's understandable, and that it also meets with the requirements of whatever journal or conference you're sending it to, because there might be specific requirements on how they like to see the paper formatted. So it needs to be in that sort of order. And that's what a reviewer will be checking for. And so I'm interested in what will the reviewer check for. I'm also interested in the case of student theses of what would a examiner check for. And this is really the same sort of issue, is what areas would they look at and work against that. Your next question was kind of on the, or flowing through this process. Okay, so now I've done that check. I believe I'm in a good state where it's publishable. What's my next step? So part of that is, what is the venue that you're sending this to? Is it a conference? Is it a journal? Which conference, which journal? Why that conference? Why that journal?
Right.
And part of this might be, you know, I'm interested in the best journal in the field of what I'm doing. Well, how do you define best? You know, there's a bunch of different metrics that are put against that. Maybe I'm not too interested in that, but is this a good venue for people to see my work?
Right, that's really interesting. Thank you. Professor Brown, there is a very important question one of our students has asked. He said, why, like, is there a topic, is there an idea that can be published and an idea that cannot be? Like, how to develop a topic in order for this topic to be published right from the very beginning, the seed of this research?
So are you talking about whether it would be publishable, or whether, how would I decide on what paper I'm going to write?
Yeah, it is starting actually from the topic. So the question is there, how to come up with an idea for a paper in order for me to take it like afterwards towards the publishing step?
So I think the first part of that is you want to do something that you enjoy. So writing a paper or doing a thesis, it's a long process and you're going to get very wrapped up in it. So you want to do something that you're actually passionate about. You want to write what you know and in your area of passion. The second bit of that is, well, then what do you write? And part of that is also understanding what has already been written about or talked about previously. So a lot of that is developing the new idea or the idea that's on the boundaries of the current literature that's out there. And so part of that is understanding what is there in the field currently.
Right.
And that process, the nice bit of that is that also forms part of your paper, because that's the literature review or the state of the art section, where you're then taking what you're doing that's new and placing it in the framework of the works around it.
Right. I think that would take me and take everybody to the next question. You've just said it is a very long process. So how long is this very long? Because one of the questions is, how much would it take to publish a paper or a book?
So it really depends on, first of all, what size of work you're creating. So for example, I was writing a very short piece the other day that was no more than 500 words, and that took me, you know, the better part of a morning. But when they're probably more interested in, like, you know, a conference paper of about 8 pages or maybe a thesis of 50, or if they're interested in a book. My most recent book that is coming out, that just came out with Hamna, that was over a year in the preparation.
Right.
And that was probably more than that, because there was also, we were thinking about it before we then went and got the book deal.
Right.
So that's probably easily 2 years.
Right.
To final form.
Lovely. Any tips you would give us and like our third and fourth year students? Now the fourth year students are hopefully getting the work done, but now the third year people, is there any kind of like tips you would give in order for them to manage the whole process, to get it really prepared, to get it done? And in terms of also time management, probably how to manage the whole writing the process from now.
I think there's this belief that the writing is kind of like this last step before, you know, the conference comes up. So imagine that the conference deadline is 2 weeks from now. I don't want to be writing the paper in the last 2 weeks. It happens. In fact, it happens quite frequently, but what I prefer to do is write as we go. So it would
Right.
be right when I start understanding the problem or just coming to a problem formulation, I might just make an early draft of a few of the sections. So I don't need to know exactly what I'm doing yet in order to write about the problem statement or about the literature review. I don't need to necessarily know what the results are in order to write the methodology section.
Right.
So
And
you're
so, yeah,
working
please go
through
ahead.
as you go. So that way it's not this huge, heavy thing to do at the end.
Right. I just remember seeing the notes, Professor Brown, you've taken, and how these notes have been developed, starting from like small little notes into paragraphs, and then into chapters, and afterwards into a published paper afterwards. So I can really, and I would really love one day that we can share this with our students as well.
Mhm.
Um, Professor Brown, one of the questions also of our students is
Yeah.
which is better, or what is the difference between working individually on your paper or working within a researcher group? Is there something you would recommend? What is the difference, advantages, and so on and so forth?
So the big advantage of having a group is usually that you have some sort of division of the labor.
Right.
So somebody might be doing the code, somebody might be writing the section, somebody might be creating the design of experiments. And so there is that kind of like breakdown in it. The problem with that is you now have all this coordination time where you have to talk through each decision and actions within it. And this also leads to issues of some of the problems that occur in multi-author papers, or if you have a supervisor, um, where people's names go on papers and they didn't maybe do everything that they should have done, like a lot of teams. And there's this issue of kind of like what they call gift authorship, where somebody's name will be put on because they were the funder of the lab. And
Right.
this is really on the borderline. There is, I believe it's known as the Vancouver Protocols, that actually spell out what an author is responsible for. And part of that
Right.
is ability that they understand everything within the document, that they signed off on it, agreed to it, that they could defend it. So when I put my name on a paper, it's because I can defend the work.
Right. And would the time, do you think the time, like time wise, would it take less time? Like, do you recommend our students to work together now?
I mean, it
Like
really
time
depends.
wise,
It really depends on the document. If there,
interest.
now
Right.
the thing is with a thesis, usually that's not supposed to be anyone but the student themselves working on it.
Right.
But some of them might be inside of various group projects or teams that are working on this, or working with a senior level PhD student or a professor on something. From my own standpoint on it, with when it comes to like the development, it's usually you have to engage in that supervision process, and that takes quite a bit of time.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah,
Peter wants to know
sure.
this very repeated question. How
Hmm.
can I choose my supervisor? Very simple, but very complicated. What do
It
you
it
think,
it
Professor?
is. I think part of this is, what problem are you interested in tackling? So you want someone that is knowledgeable in the area, because you don't want to be constantly, you don't want to be the you don't want to be the person that's constantly going into the office and they have no idea on how to direct you. And so some people are less scrupulous than others in how they choose students in order to do certain things. So you want to make sure that it's a good fit. Part of this is also, do you like that person from the standpoint of their personality? Can you deal with this person, you know, in a working relationship for the number of months that this is going to take to finally come to the solution of the problem? And I think it kind of works both ways there. So there are certain students that I have told, I can't supervise your project. And that's usually because I don't understand the problem that they're attacking in a way that I would find myself comfortable in doing the supervision.
Right. Professor Ruslan
Mhm.
wants to know the following. Would you kindly just, I will just read what he said. He said,
Sure.
if I had a hypothesis, but it was disproved, should it be included in the paper?
So this is right now a big, huge issue, I think, with all scientific publishing. My answer to that is a firm yes, it should be included. Disproving a hypothesis is showing a way
Right.
that something doesn't work, and that's of value to others to show. The problem is a lot of reviewers, when they see a disprovement of a hypothesis, they believe it to be a weaker paper. I just believe it to be you stating what happened. So I would say it's, if the question is just that, without anything else, if I've disproved something, should I talk about it? Yes, of course. I think it's very much of value to those that come after us to show where not to step as much as where to step.
Thank you. That's interesting. Professor Brown, a question from Ahmad. It says, can you or can we monetize our papers without sponsoring specific tools or services? And what about the average time for a conference paper?
Oh, monetization. Geez, you want to make money off of doing wonderful scientific work for people? Uh, Monetization, I'll tell you, if you want to be an academic and believe that you're going to make it rich, this is not the place for it.
Sorry,
And
Ahmad, hard luck then. Yeah.
um, I mean, yeah, Hamna and I have a book. Do we make money off of the sales of the book? Yes. Is it in any way like a significant sum? No, it won't be. I wasn't expecting it to ever be that. Uh, are there certain academics where they have wings put onto universities because they wrote a textbook? Yes, because there's things like, you know, introductory calculus and things like that. You know, everybody's got to buy it first year. We force you to buy it at the bookstore. Somebody is making some amount. When it comes to conference papers, usually actually you are paying in a way, in that you're paying to go to the conference. So there's a certain amount of fees in regards to that. On the extreme side of this, there's also what is known as predatory publishers. And these are people that will send you certain, you know, calls for papers that usually have a, you know, 3-4 day review time, and they will ask for page fees in the amount of thousands of dollars.
Right.
And there's entire lists of these types of predatory publications, but they're out there, and vanity publishing is out there too, where people will put basically, you know, don't go through this process. I would definitely, if you're interested in any sort of long-term career, avoid anything like this. Conversely, there's also something known as open access, where certain publishers, again, will charge you for the fact that they're going to hold it on their servers forever open to everybody to access, rather than have it behind a paywall of, you know, the server. This, as to whether it's in the predatory side or not, is dependent upon the journal. So anything that's asking you for money is not necessarily predatory, but again, this is, your mileage may vary.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Definitely, you are not, if you want to make money in computer science, stop after the masters, go and get yourself a big industry job or run a company. Don't
Right.
do what I do.
Okay. Thank you. If I may get back to Anton's question about the process of
Yeah.
publishing a paper, are there like steps that our students can keep in mind? 1, 2, 3. What are these steps after getting the paper ready? So if we are to just guide our students, do this, your paper is ready. These are the main steps to follow mainly,
So
please.
if I'm going to go from when paper is ready, and
Right.
that's already, you're nearly at the end of the process right there. So step 1 is, what venue are you publishing to? Step 2 is, what is the rules of that publisher? Do they have a certain template? Do they have a certain way that they want to see the paper? Step 3 is going through the submission protocol. Usually these days, this is an online thing where you log in, you put in, you know, your name, what institution are you working from, details about the abstract. You might be asked to ask for who would be suitable reviewers that you know for this, or who would you not want to review this. Then you make a final submission. There usually is something along the lines of, I submit this knowing that it's not submitted anywhere else and that it's not plagiarized from someone, or that it's correct and meets with these ethical frameworks. Then it submits. And then you're basically into a waiting game. And you're waiting for the reviews to come back, and that can take anywhere from, in some cases for conferences, a couple of weeks, maybe more likely about a month or two. For journals, it can be up to a year before you hear back. Then after that, there will be basically one of 3 types of decisions. Either the paper is accepted, yay, and then you go on to the next step, or the reviewers will say, we'd like you to make these changes, and then resubmit the paper, which goes through another round of review, or it's a rejection, in which case you have to go and find some other venue to try to place it in. So let's say that in this, we wrote a very nice paper and we got an accept. The reviewers are going to give you some amount of feedback, and you're kind of duty bound to at least address what that feedback is, excuse me, in the final paper. And so you'll make another round of edits, and then the publisher will ask you for another submission of the new draft with some other sets of rules on that. And then this will then go on to be published in whatever format it is. And then if there's a conference, then you attend the conference and do a presentation there. But around that point, you're into the publication. So it's very late. If you're submitting the paper, you're already at the pretty much the end. For a book, this process is much longer. So you'll normally, you'll first have to shop around and find a publisher for the book. You'll send them an abstract outline of what the book is going to be about. Then they send you a contract in regards to that. And there's certain conditions inside of there that you have to fulfill. Then you will send them the draft of the book, and they will usually go through and have it a revisional stage or a peer review stage there. And then after that, it'll be sent off usually to a professional copywriter. So this is a copy editor that will go through, who is paid by the publisher to go through and make those edits. And you get what are known as galleys. And these are like the proofs of the final book. And you have to very quickly check that all the stuff that the professional copy editor didn't mess up your book completely. And then you submit that back to them. And then after this, if you want to make any changes, they become very expensive because they're going to start the print run. And then they will print it either digitally or the physical copies of the book. And now you're a published author with a book.
Lovely. Here we go. Professor Brown, another question from Ahmed about self-publishing in the world of academia. So when does it take place?
I'm sorry, could you say again?
Yeah, Ahmed is asking, yeah, sure. Ahmed is asking about self-publishing in the world of academia. So he's saying, how viable is this? When does it work?
So here is the issue with self-publishing in the world of academia. It is kind of frowned upon because it hasn't gone through the peer review process.
Right.
So if you're publishing, like I can take anything that I'm writing and there's like things like archive that you can put what's known as a preprint up. And this is a paper that has not been through peer review that people can look at. They're known as preprints. The issue with this is you're putting something up without any sort of peer review. So people should not be taking it as highly as something that's been through the peer review process because it hasn't been validated or checked.
Right.
And so, yes, even right now, you can go onto archive, you can look up hundreds of thousands of papers, but the question is, can you trust it as much as a peer-reviewed published journal paper? I mean, even right now, we're having big issues with just random research being thrown around and statements that haven't been peer-reviewed, leading to problems.
Right. So it will be risky because of the credibility here. And so
Yeah,
we'll need to think about this issue.
yeah.
Thank you so
I
much.
usually wait until there is an acceptance of a paper before I put it out as a preprint.
Right. There is, again, another question, like, what is the difference? Why would I write a book? And I just feel like this, Ahmed wanted to know, why would I bother writing a book instead of a couple of papers? One, does a book make sense?
So a book is far more of a long form argument on this. There's usually either textbooks or, in our case, ours is more of actually a collection of some of the papers and some additional framework around it. So when does a book make sense? I would say primarily dependent upon what audience you're targeting. If you're targeting other knowledgeable people in the field, then probably a conference paper makes sense. If you're targeting this for something that can be taught in classrooms, if you want this to be something more general, then a book becomes more of a sense from an academic side. Also, there is a very large amount of works that are in kind of what I would call science popularization. And so this is closer to what you would see inside of the bookstore, like Richard Dawkins and some of those, where it's more about specific topics, and it's not really a scientific work. It's more of just a popcorn read, where it's a nonfiction discussion of the issue. And I think this also confuses a lot of students in that they see these popularizations because they're prevalent, and then they think that that person is necessarily the world-renowned expert in the field. But those are usually somebody that's taking somebody else's work where there's a bunch of papers and then digesting it into a popularization of science rather than it being the original resource. It's kind of close to what I would do in, say, a lecture. I don't necessarily teach everything that I have created. I am doing it because I'm trying to popularize it for a student body.
Right. Thank you. Professor Brown, maybe you've already tackled this issue, but if I may ask again, what challenges should students, or like those of us who are ready to publish a paper, should expect in order for us to be resilient and to know how much time to expect our papers to be published? So what challenges can be on the way through towards publishing our papers, please?
I think the first thing is you have to realize that rejection is a part of the process. Right. It's not something that is separate at all from the process. You will get a rejection at some point, if not extremely early and frequently. So that's a bit of a problem because people see that and there's this immediate emotional response of, oh, they don't like my work, so therefore my work has no value. And that might not be the case because reviewers are also humans and they're also subject to the same issues, and a lot of the times people will receive the reviews back and then not even want to read the reviews because it's a rejection. And the process and the reason why those reviews are there is in order to give you feedback to then make changes to the work.
Right.
So failure and rejection are part of science, and they're definitely a part of publication within it and even outside of science. And I think probably one of the things that everybody, highlights with this is if you look at even like big authors like Stephen King and J.K. Rowling got piles of rejections before their works were finally put into print. Harry Potter had like, I think 50 some odd rejections.
That's motivating, I guess.
Yeah, Stephen King, a lot of his works, when he put them together, he had a whole pile of works that were rejected. So he created a pen name because he wanted to see, could I get these things published now that I'm like the famous Stephen King, right? I don't want to just send this thing in and have them go, well, you're Stephen King, so we're going to publish you because you're Stephen King. He wanted to see, could I get these published even if I didn't say I was Stephen King? And his pen name that he created got so popular, but he wasn't doing any press events, right? Because it was not a person that actually existed. And so it got to the point where, you know, the jig was kind of up at some point that Stephen King had to say, oh yeah, that guy is my pen name.
Right. Yeah, that's really good to hear then. We'll have guys to be ready then.
I'm just,
yeah.
Richard Bachman.
Right.
Is the Stephen King pen name.
Uh-huh.
For those of you interested, yeah.
Right, sure. Professor Brown, one of the questions is, what tools or principles save the time or save our time towards getting our paper published? What do you recommend? How can I really, what tools would be effective for getting the papers in terms of time, you know, to get them published?
So in terms of time, you need to keep track of it.
Right.
You need to break it down. So your Outlook calendar or your Google Calendar, set some time aside every day to do a little bit of writing on it. Set some time inside of that to put some effort into it. In terms of like other tools, so much of what we do now is guided upon using LaTeX as a publication medium. So taking some time to learn how to do typesetting in LaTeX is valuable. I would also recommend that if you're using LaTeX or you're using Overleaf or something like that, don't try to make it look pretty to begin with. There's this big problem where everybody gets so into maneuvering the table so it looks perfect on the page, etc.
Right.
But then they write 3 sentences and the whole thing explodes, or they send it to someone for proofreading, and then they have to spend another hour putting the tables right. The best advice I can give for that is you just write. Wherever the tables are, you leave it. And then when you finally go to send it for review or submission, that's when you do all of the little niggling work of moving things around, moving the furniture. So focus mostly on the content, get it in, then worry about moving it.
That's really interesting. Professor Brown, if we may just get back to the publishing venues.
Sure.
Again, how can we help our students target the most convenient publishing venues for their topics? How can we guide them to choose the publication venues?
So usually experts within the field or the professors know kind of what the basic venues are available in their own field. There is a few different groups that are considered usually to be a little bit higher up. So this would be, for example, in the computer science, we normally publish with the IEEE, the ACM, Springer, or Elsevier. Usually those conferences are considered to be of high enough quality.
Right.
So it really is a specific question to the field.
Okay. Thank you. I think we have almost covered all the questions the guys have asked, and I just also had in mind, but I would just also like to ask you, Professor Brown, if you were to give us tips for all of us. We need to publish our papers. We want to get into this world of publishing our papers. What are your pieces of advice to all of us?
So I would say the first piece of this is write every day on it, break it down, do a little bit of writing, and keep a record as you go through whatever study you're doing of what you did and why you did it.
That's very interesting.
One of the things that I always come across when there's this kind of 2 hour, 2 hours to deadline mad rush, I am looking through a paper and I'll see in a revision that something wasn't well explained, and I'll mark it out and highlight it. And they'll go, well, I don't know why I did that. So, and they did at the time. So keep something off to the side. And if you make any major decision, record why you made that decision. I use this algorithm because ... What's the rest of that sentence? So it's very hard 2 years later to go back and say why you made a decision you made. At the time, it made perfect sense. The other thing that I notice, and this is just probably one of the worst tropes, is the introduction of a paper is in order to motivate people to read the rest of the paper. The introduction of the paper is meant to motivate me to read the rest of the paper. And I think I've even sent you a couple of examples of this, of computer science, since the dawn of humanity, has wondered about blah, 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 because this is an important question within our field, and right? Since the beginning of time, man has wondered whether they should wear socks. It's not motivating me to read more. It really is not. It's the quickest way is to just tropingly start with since the beginning of the dawn of computer science, we have pondered this question.
Very interesting.
So I think part of it is, why would you want to read your paper? How would you have to start that paper in order to say, this is an important problem? Don't just tell me, oh, this is an important problem. Why is this an important problem? So like, if I was just to start off and say I was doing something to do with, bioinformatics, right? I've done research work on, for example, Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease affects 1 million people in the world. It has this impact, it has this impact, it has this impact. Geez, that's a big problem. One of the issues that we're dealing with is, how do we properly diagnose when somebody has it? Okay. In order to provide this diagnosis, we need to have technology that's able to officially, follow and trace objectively someone who's having tremors. This paper examines that. So now I've built up not only just what is the hurt, what's the problem, but I've also built up how my solution deals with that hurt. So give me like a scale of the problem. Motivate me to want you to succeed in your research. Because again, you're trying to convince a reviewer. So right off the bat, you don't want to be opaque. Or that maybe that's the other bit, is there's this belief somehow that we should surprise the reader with what's going to happen. You're not writing a mystery novel. You're writing a scientific article where you're trying to show everybody what's going on and how to fix this. So you don't need to cover up how you did it. You don't need to cover up what the results are going to be. That's even the reason why you have an abstract at the start of the paper, is partially to tell people why they should read this paper and some result. So it's a lot about dragging someone in. And you know what, reviewers, I will tell you right now, for all the papers that I review, I might have 5 or 6 that are on my desk, and they're due at the end of the week. If I have to slog and fight for meaning in what you're doing, then I'm going to get bored very easily, and my score is going to start to drop. Because now I'm doing the work that I believe the paper should be doing.
Right. Professor Brown, you know what? While you were talking, I was just thinking of what can make someone a publisher? Because sometimes third year students or second year or even first year students, they would say, well, it is still very early for me. No, 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 not now. When I am a fourth year student. So how early is it for someone, and or is it really time for us to start, and when, or what features you would say are there in the publisher to do the work and to get it done?
So when should I start writing?
Right. Simply, yeah.
I would say if you have something that you're passionate about and are interested in, then start.
Right.
Uh, like I've done. I'll tell you the hardest part is looking at an empty page. The
True.
absolutely hardest part is looking at an empty page and going, what am I putting down? And I mean, I have a whole folder that is nothing but like half written stuff that I never got around to doing, or that I decided it wasn't worth doing, or the experiments didn't work well, or whatever. And I just was like, okay, off it goes. So, but I started, I've got half written pieces, and sometimes every once in a while I'll touch back on it and start it up again.
Right. This can even take me to the next question, and
Okay.
probably also we get a similar question from our fourth year student. Like, I am writing, I've written something, and it is there on the paper, but
Mhm.
now I am stuck. I do not know what to write next, and I am not really sure like, how solid what I've written is. So, what is your advice at this point? To talk to people, to read more, to what would you advise someone at this stage in particular?
So I would think part of that is, what was the purpose of that piece in the document? What were you trying to get at when you wrote that piece of it? And the other nice thing is about today, we're not dealing with typewriters, so we don't have to get whiteout out. We have a backspace and delete key, or you can comment it out. It's like in code, if you write half of a method and you go, oh, this isn't going to work, you comment it out, you start writing a new one. So don't think that just because you've written something on the page, it somehow is, sacrosanct. Editing and rewriting is part of the process. There's an entire, I can go through my overleaf, and there's entire sections of papers and some of mine where it's commented out because I didn't like how that area flowed, or it didn't group together well. I'm not afraid of the delete key, because if I give up 2-3 hours of work, but it allows me to move forward, that's worth it.
Interesting. Right, Professor Brown, I think we are done with the questions we've got. We would just leave the floor to you if there is something you think we haven't asked, and from your experience, you think we would really to highlight. So, is there something you would like to mention and we haven't asked about?
Well, I think that a lot of the questions, it really, I want to thank everybody for putting them forward. They're really well thought out, and they're definitely coming from a place where I know a lot of you are interested in this field, and a lot of them are very well formed. So I'm very pleased to see that. I would say, in terms of what kind of final advice I would say is, this is I mean, a huge part of the process. So don't think that, oh, well, I'm a computer scientist, so I'll never have to write or explain what I'm doing. Because even if you go into industry, there's a lot of writing that you'll have to do inside of that, because you'll still have to convince people, you'll still have to show them why what you're doing is correct. So the writing process doesn't stop just because you go into industry and out of academia. In fact, in some ways, it increases inside of industry, because you're usually also convincing someone that doesn't have the same knowledgeable background. So that then becomes more of like technical writing, where you're trying to convince someone that that doesn't have the same background and knowledge base. So I'm very glad that the English department is doing their job to support us with the theses, and mostly it's just, do not see this as just an additional thing that can be put aside. This is definitely a part of the field that we're in.
Thank you so much, Professor Brown. And we do also appreciate the time you've given today and the valuable information you've given us. I am one of the people who were like, I was really enjoying listening to everything you've said. And I am sure also all the people who are attending with us, they've really enjoyed it. And we've almost covered all the questions they've got. Thank you so much. And we are looking forward to more meetings and maybe to sharing our publications with you.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Brown.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.